It never ceases to amaze me just how many incredible things are happening under the waves,
Oh, I know it. I'm with you there.
especially when it comes to marine mammals.
Right.
You know, we think we have a grasp on life on land, but the ocean,
Absolutely.
it's a whole different ballgame.
Whole other world.
And today we're going deep on one of the most intriguing things about these animals.
Yeah.
How in the world do they sleep
I love it.
in the ocean?
It is a fascinating question.
You know, we close our eyes, we drift off, and we trust that
You're out.
we're out.
Yeah.
But for these creatures,
Well, and we're breathing without thinking about it.
right, they've
It's-
got to be a little more conscious of what's going on.
They're in a three-dimensional world.
Yeah.
It's not like we can just roll over.
Right.
They've got to be thinking about where they are in the water column
Yes.
all the time.
All the time.
So, yeah, how they sleep is a really interesting question.
Yeah. And we've got two really cool sources to help us unpack this.
Yeah.
We've got a piece from the Marine Detective, which is all about orcas and those resting lines.
Oh, beautiful imagery.
Amazing imagery.
Yeah.
And then we've got this in-depth scientific review article about sleep in all cetaceans.
Right. The whole group.
So we're talking
Whales, dolphins, porpoises,
the whole shebang.
the whole shebang. Yeah.
And so our mission today is to understand
Yeah.
how they actually rest.
Right.
What does it look like? What does it mean?
What's going on in those brains?
Exactly. And how is it different
Yeah.
from how we sleep?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it's safe to say that for me, at least,
Yeah.
when I was reading these articles,
Yeah.
the thing that grabbed me first were those resting lines in the Marine Detective.
Right. Yeah.
Because visually,
Oh, it's stunning.
it's breathtaking.
Yeah.
You see these orcas all lined up together at the surface,
perfectly still.
perfectly still, and
Yeah.
they look almost peaceful.
Oh.
You know, it's like a moment of perfect harmony.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of their social bond.
Yeah.
Just looking at those pictures.
And there are some amazing photos in here.
Oh, I know.
There's one of the northern resident orcas from 2007.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And another one with members of like the DCA5 and I-15 families.
It's like a who's who.
Yeah, it's amazing, from August 2020.
Wow.
And the article even says, it's like,
Yeah.
we are one.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You see them like that.
I love that.
And it really does evoke that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, what strikes me is that what
Yeah.
we see on the surface,
Yeah.
that beautiful image of them all lined up,
Right.
resting together,
Yeah.
it's just the tip of the iceberg when it
Yeah.
comes to how incredible their sleep is.
Okay, so let's.
Because what that review article tells us
Yeah.
is that what's happening in their brains during those moments
Right.
is far more complex than we might imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's dive into the brain stuff.
Let's get into the nitty gritty.
Because the review article
Yeah.
mentions this thing called unihemispheric slow wave sleep.
Right.
USWS.
USWS. It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, but
It's amazing.
it's fascinating.
It is.
So in the simplest terms,
Yeah.
what
What are we talking about here?
is it?
What's going on?
What's going on?
Okay, so imagine this.
Okay.
Only half your brain is actually asleep at any given time.
Right.
The other half
Whoa.
stays awake.
Wait, so they're like half asleep, half awake?
Exactly. It's like they're taking shifts
Wait a
in
minute.
their own minds.
How does that even work?
So one hemisphere will show those classic slow wave patterns
Okay.
that we associate with deep sleep in mammals.
Yeah.
But the other side
Right.
is humming along,
Wow.
processing information.
So is this like a cetacean thing, or is this
Well, that's the really remarkable thing.
Yeah.
Scientists have studied a variety of cetacean species. I'm talking dolphins, porpoises, whales,
Yeah.
the whole gamut. And every single one
no?
has shown evidence of USWS.
So it's like a universal.
It seems to be a fundamental characteristic of how their brains are wired.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So how did scientists even figure this out?
Right. Like, how do you even begin to study
Yeah.
something as complex as sleep
Right.
in a dolphin?
Especially in an animal that lives in the ocean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the paper actually takes us back to some early clues.
Okay.
Way back in 1972,
Right.
a group of researchers were studying a pilot whale,
Hmm.
and they were using EEGs,
Go.
electroencephalograms, which are basically recordings of
Mhm.
brainwave activity.
So you can see what the brain's doing.
Exactly. You can see the electrical signals.
Yeah.
And what they noticed in this pilot whale was
Mm.
that the two halves of its brain
Yeah.
weren't showing the same activity patterns.
Interesting.
They observed what they called frequency asynchrony and voltage asymmetry discrepancies.
So things weren't matching up.
Exactly. It was a bit of a head-scratcher at the time.
Yeah.
They didn't immediately identify it as a sleep state,
Right.
but it was definitely a hint
'Cause
that something unusual was going on.
Yeah, so like a first clue.
Exactly, the first piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so then what happened?
Well, fast forward a few years
Okay.
to the mid-1970s,
Mm-hmm.
and a scientist named Mukhamatov
Okay.
and his team,
Yeah.
they were doing some groundbreaking work with bottlenose dolphins in
Yeah.
the Black Sea, and they really focused on refining the EEG recording techniques.
Okay.
Because you can imagine it's not easy
Right.
to get good brainwave readings
On a dolphin.
from a dolphin swimming around.
Right, in the ocean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they developed these specialized methods,
Mhm.
and by 1977, they had gathered enough data
Cool.
from multiple dolphins to really hone in on this
Right.
unusual interhemispheric asymmetry.
Mm-hmm.
During periods when the dolphins seemed to be resting,
So they finally had enough data to be like,
to really analyze, and they
Yeah.
realized
yeah.
that these dolphins were showing slow-wave EEG patterns in one hemisphere,
Right.
while the other hemisphere was showing what's called EEG desynchronization,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically a sign of an awake and active brain.
Okay.
And that's when Mukhamatov actually coined the term
Okay.
unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, or USWS.
Okay.
He even came up with a definition for it.
What's the definition?
He said it's a state of the brain in which slow-wave EEG patterns are recorded in one hemisphere,
Okay.
and it could be either the left or the right.
Right.
It alternates,
Yeah.
while EEG desynchronization is recorded simultaneously in the other hemisphere.
Got it. So one side's asleep, one side's awake, and they switch
yeah.
back and forth.
It's a pretty elegant system,
It's mind-blowing.
if you think about it.
So did they have any ideas about
Yeah.
why this might be happening?
Right. From the get-go, Mukhamatov and his colleagues,
Yeah.
they proposed a few key reasons.
Okay, like what?
Well, first off, they thought it might have something to do with breathing,
Okay, makes sense.
because cetaceans have to consciously choose to breathe.
Right.
It's not an automatic process like it is for us.
Right. They've got to come up for air.
Exactly. They need to be aware of their need to breathe
Okay.
and to control those breathing muscles.
So maybe one side of the brain is like,
Yeah, it's like the designated breather,
okay,
keeping those respiratory muscles going.
gotcha.
Another idea they had
Yeah.
was that the awake hemisphere might be involved in what's called sentinel functions.
Sentinel function.
Essentially staying vigilant,
Okay.
keeping an eye out for danger,
Makes sense.
monitoring their surroundings.
Yeah, you can't let your guard down.
Exactly, especially in the ocean,
Right.
where there are predators lurking about.
Totally. So one side of the brain's got to be on guard duty.
Exactly.
Okay. And did they have any other ideas?
They also initially wondered
Yeah.
if the awake side of the brain
Right.
might be experiencing a form of paradoxical sleep.
Paradoxical sleep, like REM sleep.
Yeah, but that idea has kind of evolved over time.
Okay, we'll get to that.
We'll definitely circle back to REM sleep
Okay.
because it's a whole other mystery.
Okay, but before we get there,
Yeah.
I'm curious about, like, how much time do they actually spend in this USWS state?
Good question, because it's not a constant thing.
Right.
It's not like they're always half asleep.
Okay.
The research shows that the amount of time they spend in USWS can vary,
Mm-hmm.
but in dolphins, for example,
Yeah.
it can range from something like 34% to 57%.
Wow, so like a third to over half.
Yeah, of their total 24-hour cycle.
That's a lot of time.
It's a significant chunk of their day.
And what about the length of those USWS episodes?
Right, so those episodes, they're not just like quick little naps.
Okay.
On average, they last about 42 minutes in bottlenose dolphins and around 44 minutes in a beluga whale.
Interesting.
But the key here is flexibility.
Okay.
Each hemisphere tends to take turns
Right.
being in that deeper slow wave sleep.
So they switch back and forth.
Exactly.
okay.
And there can even be individual differences
Oh,
in
right.
how long each side rests.
So some dolphins might be like,
Yeah, some might be heavy sleepers on one side and
Yeah.
lighter sleepers on the other.
wow, it's like they have their own sleep preferences.
It really is remarkable.
Yeah, and it's not just the surface of the brain involved, is it?
Right, we're not just talking about the outer layer.
Okay.
This USWS thing, it runs deep.
How deep?
Well, the research shows
Yeah.
that it involves the entire cortical thalamic system.
Okay, remind me what that is again.
It's essentially a key communication network in the brain
Okay.
that plays a vital role in regulating consciousness and sleep. Right, so it's like the control center.
Exactly. And what they found
Yeah.
is that the electrical activity
Okay.
in the ipsilateral cortex and thalamus,
Ipsilateral meaning?
meaning on the same side of the brain.
Right.
So the cortex and the thalamus on the same side, they change in sync.
Okay.
So it's a coordinated effort.
So it's not just like a little...
No, it's a whole brain phenomenon.
Okay, so the whole side of the brain is either asleep or awake.
It's like a team effort
Wow.
on each side.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I really want to talk about this REM sleep thing.
Yes, let's get to the enigma of REM sleep.
Because it's a big question mark, right?
It is. It's one of the biggest mysteries in cetacean sleep research.
Okay, so what's the deal?
Well, despite a lot of effort
Yeah.
to find evidence of REM sleep in cetaceans,
Right.
it's been incredibly elusive.
Really? So they haven't found any?
Well, almost none.
Okay.
There was a single report way back in 1969
Okay.
of a possible REM episode in a pilot whale.
Okay.
But even that report
Yeah.
is debated.
Yeah, okay.
And since then,
Yeah.
nothing conclusive has really emerged.
Wow, so like a big goose egg?
Pretty much.
But we do see them do some things
Well,
that look like REM sleep behavior, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting part because while the brainwave activity doesn't really match up with what we'd expect for REM sleep,
Okay.
we do see some of the typical behaviors.
Like what?
Well, things like muscle twitches or jerks.
Yeah, like when dogs dream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even some eye movements.
Okay, so they are moving their eyes.
They are, but it's not the same kind of rapid eye movement
Right.
that we see in REM sleep in other mammals.
Okay.
It's more sporadic
Sort of patterned.
and less patterned.
So it's like REM-ish, but not quite REM.
Exactly. And these behaviors, they've been observed in a variety of cetacean species.
Okay, like what this?
Bottlenose dolphins, Amazon river dolphins, belugas, even killer whales.
So it's not species specific?
No, it seems to be a more widespread phenomenon.
Okay.
And the review actually has a whole table
Oh, cool.
breaking down the frequency of these muscle jerks in different species.
So like how often they twitch?
Yeah. For example, they observed one gray whale calf having 45 jerks over 6 days.
45 jerks.
Yeah. But bottlenose dolphins, they showed a much wider range.
Interesting, so it's variable.
It seems to be.
Okay, so the million-dollar question then?
Right. Why are they twitching?
If it's not REM sleep.
And if their brains aren't showing those classic REM patterns, what's going on?
Yeah.
Well, there are a few possibilities. One idea is that maybe they do have a form of REM sleep, but it's so modified
Okay.
that we're not picking it up with our current methods.
So like REM 2.0?
Yeah, something unique to cetaceans.
Okay.
Another possibility is that these twitches and movements
Right.
aren't actually related to sleep at all.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe they serve some other function.
Like what?
Well, we don't really know for sure.
Okay.
It could be something to do with muscle maintenance.
Right.
Or even just a way to release pent-up energy.
Interesting.
It's a bit of a puzzle.
So we're still figuring that part out.
Yeah, it's an area of active research.
Okay, well that's exciting.
It is. There's still so much to learn.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit.
Yeah.
We've talked about the brain stuff.
Right.
But I'm also really curious about how they physically manage to sleep in the water.
Right, because it's not like they can just lie down and close their eyes.
Yeah, they can't just drift off.
They've got to be a bit more strategic.
Exactly.
And this is where USWS seems to play a crucial role.
Okay, how so?
Well, remember that one hemisphere is always more awake,
Right.
and that allows them to maintain a certain level of consciousness,
Okay.
even while the other half of their brain is resting,
Yeah.
so they can still control their movements.
Coordinate their breathing. Right. And stay aware of their surroundings.
Some sense.
It's like having a built-in autopilot
Okay.
that keeps them safe and functioning.
So they're like swimming and sleeping at the same time.
Essentially, yeah.
That is wild.
It is.
And the review article actually mentions that
Yeah.
continuous swimming
Right.
has been observed in porpoises and some smaller dolphins.
Yeah, those guys are constantly on the move.
Yeah.
They never really stop.
Wow.
And they've even recorded USWS
Really?
in harbor porpoises while they're swimming.
So they are literally half asleep
It seems...
while swimming around.
It's amazing.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And then there's also like the bigger whales.
Right. The larger cetaceans.
Yeah.
They tend to have a bit more flexibility.
Okay.
When the ocean conditions are calm, they can often rest at the surface
Right.
with minimal movement.
Okay.
Some species might even slowly sink
Oh,
and rest
wow.
on the seabed for short periods.
That's amazing.
But even in these cases,
Yeah.
USWS is probably still at play.
Right. So they're still partially aware.
Exactly. They're not completely out of it.
Okay, so then what about that classic image
Oh, yeah.
of a sleeping dolphin
Yeah.
with one eye open?
The iconic one-eyed sleep.
Is that actually linked to which side of the brain is sleeping?
Well, it turns out there is a very direct connection.
Okay, tell me everything.
So research by Lyman and his team,
Mm-hmm.
working with belugas and bottlenose dolphins,
Right.
has shown that the eye on the side opposite the more deeply sleeping hemisphere
Okay.
is usually closed or partially closed, while the eye opposite the awake hemisphere
Right.
tends to be open, or at least partially open.
So it's like the awake side of the brain
Yeah,
is literally keeping an eye out.
exact. That's so
It's like they're looking out for danger with one eye.
And the other eye's like, yeah, the other eye's getting some shut-eye.
I love it.
It's a remarkable adaptation.
And that makes perfect sense
Yeah,
from a sentinel function perspective.
absolutely.
You know, if one half of your brain is resting,
Right.
the other half can literally keep an eye on things.
And it's especially crucial for mothers and their calves.
Oh, right, because...
The review mentions observations of mothers
Yeah.
surfacing with both eyes open,
Okay.
almost constantly.
Right, oh, yeah.
While the calves also do this frequently,
Okay.
but slightly less often.
Interesting.
And what's really cool is that the calf's open eye
Mm-hmm.
is often directed towards the mother. It's like they're checking in,
like, Mom, are you there?
making sure mom's still there.
That is so sweet.
It's like a visual
I
tether,
love it.
keeping them connected.
So it's not just about predator avoidance.
Right. It's also about
It's also about that social bond,
exactly maintaining that crucial connection.
especially between a mother and her calf.
Absolutely.
So cool.
It's fascinating.
Okay, so then we've talked about
Yeah.
what it looks like.
Mhm.
We've talked about how they do it behaviorally.
Right, yeah.
But what about the actual physiological mechanisms?
Right. How is this whole thing actually happening in their brains?
Yeah.
Well, the review dives into a few key areas.
Okay.
And it's pretty complex stuff.
Okay.
But I'll try to break it down.
Please do.
So one thing I mentioned is lateralization of arousal systems,
Lateralization, meaning
that the parts of the brain
Oh,
that
hi.
are responsible for waking you up
right.
might function more independently
Okay.
on each side of the brain in cetaceans.
So it's like they have two separate...
Yeah, almost like two separate alarm clocks.
Wow. That's what.
And then there are also these sleep deprivation studies.
Okay, tell me about those.
So researchers have actually looked at
Yeah.
what happens when you deprive one hemisphere
Okay.
of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found is that each hemisphere
Mm-hmm.
has its own fundamental need for rest.
Okay.
So one side can't simply compensate.
Right.
If the other side is sleep deprived,
So it's not like they can just...
no, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Okay.
Each hemisphere has its own sleep quota.
It's so interesting.
And here's another really cool finding.
Yeah.
When both hemispheres
Mm-hmm.
show high voltage slow wave activity.
So like they're both in deep sleep?
Yeah, like a full brain shutdown.
Okay.
It seems to be incompatible with autonomous breathing in dolphins.
Oh.
So they can't actually breathe properly
Okay.
if both sides of their brain are fully asleep.
So they have to have at least one side.
At least one side has to be somewhat online
Wow.
to keep those breathing muscles going.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of that asymmetrical sleep pattern.
So it's not just a cool trick.
No, it's essential for their survival.
Right. It's like a life or death situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so then the big question is,
Right. Why?
why did cetacean sleep evolve this way?
Out of all the ways to sleep.
Out of all the options.
Why this strange half-brain approach?
Yeah. What were the driving forces?
Well, the review points to a couple of key hypotheses,
Okay, hit me with them.
and they're both tied to the unique challenges of living in the ocean.
Okay, so the ocean environment.
Exactly. It's all about adaptation.
Okay.
So the first hypothesis
Sure.
revolves around what we've already touched on.
Okay.
Sentinel functions.
Right. Staying vigilant.
Exactly. In the open ocean,
Mm.
being constantly aware of your surroundings
Yeah.
is a huge advantage.
Right. You never know what's lurking out there.
Exactly. You've got to be ready for anything.
And they don't have like walls and...
No, they're exposed.
Yeah.
They're in a three-dimensional world
Yeah.
where danger can come from any direction.
And they're social animals, right?
Right. So they need to keep track of their pod members.
Yeah. They can't get separated.
Exactly. So having one half of